I'm Patricia King, and I am the patron saint of the Viking Range Corporation. The kitchen in a townhouse in the West Village in 1985-86, and I was looking to put a restaurant range in my kitchen. I wanted something professional. But there was no hope to do that in my kitchen because in New York we had rules that said because a restaurant range is not insulated, that I would have to insulate the kitchen. And that would mean lowering the ceiling by 6 inches, raising the floor by 6 inches, and bringing one wall in 6 inches so that the stove could be surrounded with the right kind of insulation. And that was absurd. I couldn't do that. So I said to the architect, Jeff, there has to be somebody who's making something that's not ordinary, but not a restaurant stove. And he said, I don't think so. And I said, oh, there must be. I can't be the only person who wants this. And so I refused to give up the idea. There was a blank space in my kitchen where the stove was supposed to go. And he went around looking for this thing that he didn't think existed. And eventually he presented me with a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of a flyer. And there was a drawing on it and the specifications. And it said Viking Range Corporation with an 800 number at the bottom. And I said, this is I told you, I said, this is exactly what I want. How do I order it? And he said, call the 800 number. So I called the 800 number. That was the best phone call I ever made because at that time, unbeknownst to me, I thought Viking was a going concern and famous. I just took a long time to find it. So I called and I said I wanted to order a Viking range. And the person who answered my call was Fred Carl. Now, when I knew I was going to be talking to Fred Carl, the person who answered the phone told me that. And I had no idea who he was. I thought I was speaking to a salesman. And I admonished him, telling him that his company should make itself better known. Little did I know that at that moment, Fred was considering giving up the whole idea of manufacturing the Viking range because he and Margaret had spent 2 years with a prototype on the back of their car, driving around looking for people to interest them in this great idea that he had. And everyone told him he was crazy. Because in 1985-86, the microwave was the big rage, and women were in the workforce, and so mama wasn't in the kitchen anymore, and convenience foods and microwaves were the wave of the future, and no one would want anything like a professional range for the home. Ha ha ha. Because by sticking to his guns, Fred eventually, with his invention of the Viking range, revolutionized kitchen appliances in the United States. And I got to be a part of that because when I called, it gave him hope and it gave him a story to tell. There's this woman from New York City who lives in Greenwich Village and wants to put a Viking range in her New York townhouse. That was a good story. So, so that's how I got to be this person who was the luckiest person ever to buy a Viking range by being the first one to do it. Fred said, it'll take me 6 to 9 months to deliver. And I thought that meant there was a backlog of orders. I had no idea why it was going to take that long, but I just assumed it would. Of course, there's a backlog. If he's the only one who's making this wonderful thing, then there would be. So I said, that's okay. I don't care. As long as I get what I want, I'll wait. And so uh, 6 months, 9 months later, the stove arrived, and we installed it in the kitchen. And what it was a prototype. And it became clear that it was a prototype because there were things about it that were not really arranged the way they should be for someone who's trying to use that range to feed a family. Such as, I mean, if you do this now, it just lights. But there was no place where you there was a place you had to get get the light thing to work, and there was no mark on it. I was using magic marker on it to get, so there were little things like that. Eventually, just for fun, I started calling my kitchen the New York test kitchen for the Viking Range Corporation. And so that was really, we had a lot of fun with that. Fred and Margaret and Dale Persons, who was the advertising and public relations guy at the time. We had so much fun uh, uh, fooling around with that idea. And they would send me gifts at Christmas time, and I would send them New York cheesecakes, and I would sign my name, Patricia King, directress of the New York Test Kitchen Viking Range Corporation. That's the kind, we just had a lot of fun. And so that was the prototype. Then, year 10 from the founding of the company, the Viking Range was on the cover of Time magazine. And the Viking Range was the biggest range in kitchen equipment. And there's the story about the check. This is a prototype of the first check anybody ever wrote to the Viking Range Corporation, and it is dated on the Ides of March, March 15th, 1986, and signed by my husband, David Clark. And Fred had this check in his office in a frame. And things got so bad at the beginning that he broke the glass and cashed the check. And right around year 10, Dale Persons called me up and said, could you find that check for me? Because we're going to have a big Christmas party because everything is going so well for us now. And we want to present Fred with the real check that was written. Fred was so completely grateful for getting this souvenir of the beginning days back that he wrote me a letter in January. And he said, he attached to the letter was this wonderful, wonderful list. And it was a list of the owners of Viking ranges. And it was the Japanese ambassador and Madonna and, all of Philip Roth. There were, National Book Award winners and movie stars and everybody on that list. But also on that list, it said premier Viking owners, David J. Clark and Patricia King. So I said, wow, look at us. We aren't really anybody in that class except for the Viking range. But anyway, Fred said that the new ranges were much better engineered than what I had. And he offered to replace my prototype. And so he gave me a new Viking range. And that was my second one. In 2007, 2008, David and I sold that house and bought this apartment. And it was a part of a duplex. This was the second floor of a duplex, and there was no kitchen on the floor. So I called Dale Persons and I said, I'm going to get what I want. I am going to get a completely Viking kitchen. Microwave, there's a Viking toaster. Everything in this kitchen says Viking. And I'm very proud of that. But Fred said to me, who's going to design your kitchen? He said, I'm going to have someone call you. And the person who called me is Andrea Tobias, who designed the family kitchen in the White House. And I told her what I wanted in my kitchen, and this kitchen functions exactly the way I wanted it to. I write historical murder mysteries, and I have lots of friends who are also crime writers. And we have a little group that gets together every 2 months, every 4 months, not so much during the hot weather. And we cook together. And I've been in here with 5 other writers. It's gracious and nice and functional. It isn't a show place. It's a laboratory for food, and I love it. And I love it here. Yeah. I had to get a new range because the old one stayed in the old house. And so I bought a new one. And it was here for the first 10 years. I lived here and I was very satisfied with that one. But I made my second pilgrimage to Greenwood 2 years ago and got the royal treatment the way I have each time. And I got a tour of the factory, and Kevin Brown, right, said showed me around, and he was showing me all the improvements in technology, and it was very interesting. There were things about that, the way that factory now operates, that were very impressive. And so we went around, and he showed those things to me, and then he brought me to the center of the factory, and he said, "There's one other thing I want to show you." And we had passed by there before, and we went to this place, and there was this beautiful range in the middle of it with a big blue bow on it. And he said, "This is your range." And I said, "No, no, mine it's like this, but mine has, the knobs are a little bit different, and mine has a griddle too, but the griddle is there, it's not there." And he said, "No, no, this is your range." And I said, "No, no, I'm telling you, mine is different from this." My friend who was with me gave me an elbow and said, "There's a bow on it. It's yours." And I did that thing that you see people do in movies that I didn't think human beings actually did do. I went, and they took a picture of me and put it in the newspaper, just like that. It was very funny. And so they sent this beautiful, beautiful thing to me. And this is my 4th Viking range. And Dale Persons, who has since retired but is still a friend of mine, he he said, "You're the only person in the world who is on a buy one, get one free plan with the Viking Range Corporation." So I said, I'm the luckiest person ever to buy a Viking range, and I still think that about myself. Years ago, I was interviewed on CBS Sunday Morning. They wanted to interview the first person whoever bought a Viking range. There was an article in the New Yorker about it, and then there was the CBS Sunday Morning thing, and it was funny because the joke was that most people wanted it because it was fashionable. They weren't really going to cook on it. And when I was on CBS Sunday Morning, they had something like this. It wasn't this beautiful. It was that model in those days. And it was a Christmas time, and they had poinsettia plants on the burners. And that was the joke, when their cleaning staff came in, they dusted it because nobody ever cooked on it. But that wasn't me. I am a person who wants home-cooked meals, and I want my food the way I want my food. So I use it a lot. I take good care of it, but I use it a lot. All right, so I am enjoying the Viking life. Hashtag liking my Viking. I actually am loving my Viking.